Well, joining me now to discuss this in a bit more detail, former Senior Intelligence and Security Officer Philip Ingram. So, Philip, let's start by talking about the tanks. It's getting all the headlines. What are the latest on the discussions about donating these Leopard 2s?
It is. Well, the discussions are going on day 334 of Vladimir Putin's 10-day military operation, and we're still talking about Leopard 2s. Chancellor Scholz's spokesperson has said today there's been no official inquiry from those other European nations that have Leopard 2 tanks and they say they want to transfer them, in particular Poland and Finland. And I think Poland and Finland want to get a coalition where Germany actually donate some of its tanks as well. But Chancellor Scholz's spokesperson said, we assume that other parties will follow the prevailing law when they put their application in. However, the Poles have started training Ukrainians on the tanks, and it's that training bit that is important.
Given the fact that some countries are willing to hand them over, Germany, it remains to be seen. We thought that decision would be taken Friday at that big meeting of foreign ministers, but it didn't happen. When should we expect to see some of these tanks arrive in Ukraine? Because Volodymyr Zelenskyy has reminded the West countless times that time is of the essence, essentially.
It is, but there's no point in the tanks getting into Ukraine until their crews are ready to use them and operate them. And putting it into context, and it's slightly different, but the British Challenger 2 and the Ukrainians have already started, or are starting this week, to be trained in Challenger 2. If you take a newly trained British Army soldier and put him onto the standard course to teach them the basics of that, it's a 20-week course. Now, that's a peacetime course. It's going to be accelerated for the Ukrainians because they will send their most experienced tank crews in to learn about this. So that'll be compressed very quickly indeed. But not only do they have to learn to operate the tank, those maintainers need to learn how to maintain it, and then they need to learn how to fight it with other tanks and with other infantry fighting vehicles and other bits and pieces. So it's quite complex. So getting the tanks into Ukraine at the minute, we've got several weeks before the Ukrainians are even going to be in a position to operate them and use them. That gives plenty of time for this political machinations to be sorted out.
Yeah, highly pressurised situation. What does all this mean for the spring offensive? Because that's what Ukraine are getting ready for.
Yeah, we keep hearing about the spring offensive and everything that's going on, and there's sort of three areas that people are focusing on. The thing that's going to drive it is the ground. Whenever the ground is hard enough for those heavy armoured vehicles, remember the British Army Challenger 2 is over 70 tonnes, to be able to get across it. So it's not going to be early spring, it's too boggy. There are three areas that we're looking at. Talk over the weekend around the Zaporizhzhia area. The Russians are concerned that the Ukrainians are building up, and the Ukrainians are going to try and attack down and split this land bridge that they've got from Crimea the whole way through. If the Ukrainians do that, the Russian defences could collapse completely. Further up in the north, northeast around Crimea, the Ukrainians are pushing in through here and having some small successes, and the Russians have built some defensive lines to the south of Crimea, and the whole way around their lines, the Russians are building layers of defence. With all the fighting at the moment going on around Bakhmut, and Bakhmut has been fighting for that for the last 6 months or so. However, I think the Ukrainians are effectively fixing the Russians in place there, so that they're focusing on that. And that's allowing the Ukrainians to take some of their more experienced crews and send them off to be trained elsewhere.
OK, Philip, thank you, Philip Ingram there.